Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Not Content Podcast. My name is Jerome Cuson. Here tonight, we are going to continue our examination of 1939. This week, we are taking a look at Only Angels Have Wings. This is part of the From the Q podcasting network. You can leave a 5-star review on Apple or Spotify, get those algorithms going. You can also leave a subscribe here on YouTube. Give this a like so that we can forge forward here. And of course, this week, as I mentioned, we are going over 1939. Last week, we discussed a very notable Frank Capra classic, Mr. Smith Goes to Washington. This week, it's Howard Hawks, but Brian, we have inadvertently, with the exception of one movie, made it Thomas Mitchell month. Who'd have thought?
Thomas Mitchell is this great character actor from this era, and in 1939 had a hell of a run. Only Angels Have Wings. We discussed Mr. Smith Goes to Washington last week. That's also Frank Capra. This is Howard Hawks. Stagecoach is directed by the great John Ford. And he also was he in Gone with the Wind? Is that the other one? But yeah, because he worked with Victor Fleming. Or no, Victor Fleming was Wizard of Oz, excuse me. But still, like, he had a hell of a run in 1939. He got the Oscar nomination, or did he win for one of those movies?
He did, in fact, win the Academy Award. He did win an Academy Award for Stagecoach, which we are talking about next week.
Okay,
and he wasn't Gone with the Wind. We could have done an entire month of Thomas Mitchell movies because he was indeed in Gone with the Wind. But alas, I will never watch that movie. So unfortunately, he will not be discussed on the final week of our look at 1939.
I'll just say this: Gone with the Wind I watched one time in my teens, and I just cannot connect with it. And I can tell that people have just lost interest in praising that movie over time because of the racism. So let's just keep it at that. But
I think that's. Look. Stagecoach. We're kind of making an exception for. We're going to get into some of the racism of that. Only Angels Have Wings. Well, it's not as racist. It does have a little bit of it, but not nearly as bad.
No, but the thing with this plot of this movie is that I think they went, or at least what Howard Hawks tried to do, was go for like the extraordinary effects for the time. Because obviously, when you watch this movie, you can't help but think like they got really influenced by King Kong in '33, and then Son of Kong and Mighty Joe Young, and doing these like miniatures type stuff. And if you look at the airplanes, the way they're landing and the way they're being controlled in some of those shots, they're switching off between the live shots of the plane, set interiors of the plane, and then mixing it up with miniatures. So it kind of blended in well with the black and white. I gotta say, like, this movie's really focused on like the effects, less so on the script. It feels, because it feels like the script is like split into two parts, one with like the love story with Jean Arthur, and the other half with the whole company almost going under, this airline company that's trying to struggle to get on its feet, so to speak. But the thing is like they lay all these things out on the table, but they don't get to the heart of like the morals, you know what I'm saying? Like, because basically what Cary Grant is doing, he's the leader of this, like, or he's the boss of this airline and this foreign country, I can't even pronounce it, Barranca Airways. And basically he's the boss, and they're in this area where like the weather is just always crap and shit, and you're always risking death. But they never ever go to the heart of the matter. It's like this dude is sacrificing pilots for money, and they never get into that. So that's kind of what I'm kind of frustrated with about this movie, is that at the heart of this movie is greed, but they never ever touch on it.
I would argue that is the biggest sin of this movie, is that it doesn't really get to the heart of the matter. I think this movie is very much all over the place. I think there are some good performances. I especially appreciate what Jean Arthur is doing. I think Rita Hayworth, I think, gives a very good performance. I think Thomas Mitchell's very good. Cary Grant feels like a miscast. I think that Cary Grant is at his best when he's kind of being like allowed to be snarky and funny. Like, he doesn't really get to do that he's not somebody who shows vulnerability really well. He doesn't show vulnerability, especially in this movie and in his younger days. I mean, I think he does a better job in a movie like North by Northwest when he's a little bit older, but I just don't think that he's the person for this role. Like to me, I would say that Humphrey Bogart is much more appropriate for this role in terms of the tone and in terms of like there's a certain bitterness that feels like that's what the lead should have, is that bitterness, the world weariness, and I just don't get that, and probably would never get that from Cary Grant's character. And it's really unfortunate because I think there is some really genuinely impressive technical stuff going on here. There's a lot of genuinely interesting stuff with the airplane that just with the context of it being 1939, it makes it really impressive. And navigating those challenges. And there's some really interesting ideas in this movie, but I think the fundamental problem with it, and the reason that I would say it's not my absolute favorite from 1939, is because of the fact that it just has the vibe of a 2-hour soap opera and not of a fully realized movie. And I mean, and it's fine. Like if you want to go with the romantic angle, I don't necessarily have a problem with that, but it just feels like you are setting up this movie where like you have this struggling airline and the only way that they can survive is by making these really dangerous air trips, but then you kind of de-invest in that. And like it's really weird. Like they kill one of the young pilots early on, and then it gets quickly forgotten, and you're re-emphasizing the fact that Cary Grant and Jean Arthur are supposed to be together, and then you throw the Rita Hayworth in all of this. And like I said, it gives off a very soap opera-ish vibe. And I mean, maybe if you have this as a limited series of 6 to 8 episodes, like maybe this works out so much better. But within the context of a 2-hour movie, I think it's entertaining in its own right. I think there's still some really good moments, but I don't think that it ever really adds up into being this classic that I think some people have touted it as.
I think people are kind of having the rose-colored glasses when it comes to the effects. That's probably why. Because I gotta admit, like I said, like it's almost seamless the way they did it. Because like the strength of black and white, you can hide a lot of stuff, and they kind of did that. And yes, we watched it in HD, and Amazon Prime has a maxed out HD stream, but we did see some strings here and there. But that's fine. I mean, you probably didn't notice that in the 30s as if you were a viewer, so that's fine. But I think that's kind of what people remember. And of course, Cary Grant is this magnificent actor. And you talk about being a miscast. I think you're right on that. But if you do put in Humphrey Bogart, you're leaning into that Casablanca territory. And we didn't get Casablanca until like 4 years later, 2 years later. But still, like, it does have that kind of Casablanca type feel. But Casablanca is the far superior film in terms of delivery, and even the performances are even better in Casablanca. But and that has Claude Rains. But it does kind of have that vibe, and I don't know if it's this kind of like trope of this era of like we have to have white American pilots go to these foreign lands and kind of like mix with the women, right? And then be this like, oh, this American is in town, and you're in the like, and everyone else is like speaking Spanish or something like that, because that's kind of the vibe that I'm getting from this and a lot of movies from that era, where it's like these foreigners are in these ports during war times or whatever, or early 1930s 40s times, and they're trying to mingle with the locals kind of thing. And that's kind of the vibe I was getting with this, so that kind of made sense in terms of like the time period. But I think that's why the plot kind of goes all over the place, because you got these serious themes in the background and stuff they're not even talking about, like I mentioned with the greed, because basically Cary Grant is just, as soon as that pilot dies in the beginning, 20 minutes later he's no selling it. And then once his best friend dies, he's got all this compassion for him, and then he starts crying. But he didn't show any compassion for that pilot at the beginning of the movie, which I thought was kind of fucked up.
Cary Grant does a lot of no selling in this movie. He gets shot and basically knows that. I mean, he gets shot in the shoulder, admittedly, so it's not like he was going to die. But like, he doesn't even sell it at all. It's really, really strange.
That's that macho machismo from the 30s and 40s, man. I swear to God.
I
When
mean,
I saw that, I was laughing
yeah.
my ass off. Because, like, clearly the guy probably has some nerve damage, and he's just not even, like, you can tell his arm is just still. It's not even reacting to, like, the pain. So I thought that was hilarious. Typical 1930s, 40s ideals of if somebody gets shot in the arm, just leave the bullet in there. We'll get it out later. That kind of thing. Don't even send him to the hospital. So that was pretty intense. But, yeah, and that was an accidental shot, too. Like, he wasn't even being shot at. Someone just put the gun on the table, and he got shot. So... typical. But still, you mentioned that soap opera vibe, and they definitely have that going with Gene Arthur. And the way I kind of picture it in my head, like if you do a limited series on Amazon or something like that, you could probably get 2 seasons out of this. Where like I would do like the first 50 minutes as like its own season, because there's a lot going on just in the first 50 minutes, just to set up Gene Arthur and Cary Grant coming together, and all the different pilots, and it's kind of hard to pick up on. And there's also like a running clock at the beginning of the movie in your head, like, well, she's got till 4 a.m. What is she gonna do in like the next 3 hours for this movie? And then the twist is she stays for the next week. So I can easily see that as like,
She wants Cary Grant really badly. That's why.
yeah. So, and she kind of admits it, but she's like ashamed of it. But it's like, I get it. We've all done stupid things for sex, so I get it. But in this case, like you could easily see how like that would be the twist ending of like a first season where she's there, right? Like when that moment he opens the door and she's there, he's like, oh shit, I fucked up. I think I took it too far with her in terms of like seducing her, because now she's stuck with him for a week and he's like kind of annoyed with it until like the end of the week where they kind of finally like settle down and realize, okay, maybe this is something we can work on. But I think that shocking twist at that 50, I timed it. It's the 50-minute mark of the movie in a 2-hour movie where I was like, this is a big twist, because like I thought she was going to be gone or something, because there's no actual plot line other than the love story with them.
No, I mean, I think that part of what this movie is seemingly trying to do is like there is both an ensemble feel to it, but there's also the fact that Cary Grant and Gene Arthur's characters are really the only ones that quote unquote matter. I mean, there is some redemption for one of the characters for sure, but I mean, even Thomas Mitchell, like his death scene, like it's really well done. Like Thomas Mitchell does a great job. Like this is, it's funny because it feels like in every other movie he plays drunk, and this is a movie where he's not necessarily drunk, but he does die, and I think his death scene is really good, but it just doesn't feel like it's the most important part of the movie. It simultaneously feels like this is meant to be a climax because we need some sort of an action climax, but we also didn't really invest in the character in total. We kind of made him this side character, which he's very good at. Like this is what he is good at in any movie that we've seen him on up to this point. And the movie we're going to talk about next week, like this is what he is really good at. But to really like quote unquote care about his death is just really difficult.
And it's interesting too because he's the one with the most interesting storyline, and I guess we got to kind of lay it out where his character had a brother that died off screen, but in that accident he died in the plane accident. But the mechanic, or he was a mechanic, his brother, the character Bat that comes into the movie, he was the one that bailed out and left his brother in the plane. So he's got this guilt, like, oh, you let my brother die. How could you do that? And they have this, coincidentally they meet up in Barranca like, randomly, right? And how does that randomly happen, quote unquote? But and that's kind of the background. So he's frustrated that he felt like his brother died because of Bat. So they kind of build up this thing where it's like it's clear that if it's good writing, they're going to come together and kind of work together to get through a mission or something, which they did, which was good. So that was like, despite some of the plot, being kind of weak, that was probably the best plot. Part of the plot was that kind of relationship, that struggle, this kind of feud that they kind of have to resolve with each other. And so basically, it's just kind of this redemption thing because the brother situation, and if you kind of forgive him, and then he gets accepted by the other pilots. So that's kind of the plot there. But I think that's the most interesting plot of the movie, or part of the plot of the movie. Because if you do that like at a season 2 of a show, like I mentioned, I think that's a really interesting plot line that can kind of have its arc all the way through the season finale on that one. So I think that would have been a cool season finale. But again, this is just a 2-hour movie. But I think if Apple or someone wanted to extend it, Amazon or whatever, I think this would be a good 2-season arc. And a little quick note here: we mentioned the special effects really cutting it close. The reshoots actually took place 12 days before the movie came out. So even in we talked about this before, and even in modern movies, how like movies are just like cutting it close with all these like special effects stuff and not getting things done on time. And well, it's 1939 and they're still doing the same thing. So that was really interesting. Do you want to talk about the two-sided coin that kind of foreshadows the debut of a certain DC character?
I mean, could Cary Grant have been Two-Face in another generation? Probably. But yes, there is a two-headed coin, and again, you mentioned the fact that how things are so similar from 1939 now. I think the theme of this journey through 1939, Brian, is the view never changes.
It does indeed. And a little quick note: Harvey Dent did not debut in DC Comics until 1942. So I don't know. It just seems like someone saw
I'm
this
sure that
idea.
I'm sure that there have been double-sided coins in other forms of media. It would not surprise me if this had some sort of influence, but I'm going to guess that the two-headed coin is something that has been done before.
Yeah, it's just kind of weird because we haven't seen so many movies from this era, but it was just so like striking to me because I was trying to figure out like, oh shit, did they read the comics? And then I look it up. Comic came out after. So really interesting stuff there. But yeah, I mean, this movie made money for the time. It had its, accolades. It's got a lot of like, retrospective accolades, I would say, in terms of like Howard Hawks and the way he directs things. And kind of this is like the movie that kind of put things together for him. And this is kind of like his first big, not first big movie necessarily, but first big breakout to where it's like people recognize his talent as a director. And you can see that when he puts together these action sequences, mixing up all the miniatures and stuff like that. So this movie is like a fun watch for the era. It's just don't get too invested in the plot because you're going to get frustrated. And it feels like Gene Arthur just kind of got wasted. But again, it's for the time, and none of these women's roles are very, very written
I mean,
well.
I think the most interesting thing to me is that Cary Grant never gets in the plane. Like he's the main character, but he's always on the sidelines, like on the phone, guiding the planes.
I mean, he
It's
did
a
have
really
that one test shot. But that was kind of it, and it wasn't even like a big plane. It was like kind of like a fighter plane almost. It looked like because the inside is much different than the planes they were using, but still like really interesting the way they put it together, and also the death of Thomas Mitchell is really interesting because it's hard to figure out what happened at first until you realize what happened later on, and they reveal it because basically what happened is they're in the plane. There's this thing where birds, it does happen in real life where birds kind of fly into the window and break the window or get into the engine and mess up
I
the
mean,
engine.
there's a whole real life incident that Clint Eastwood made a movie about.
Yeah, I know. So it's unfortunate, but you can't tell what happened at first. But the Thomas Mitchell goes, dude, I can't move. And I'm like, did he break his leg? Did something happen? Did I miss something? Because all you see is the birds hit him. And then and then they reveal that he breaks his neck. And I'm just like, oh my God, that's like the worst way to fucking die, right? It's like he's gonna just not feel anything from the bottom down and just slowly drift away because they don't have any fucking proper doctors to fix him. And it's just like, wow. And the way they took him out of the plane was the wrong way to take someone out of a plane with a broken freaking neck.
I mean, we were very. I mean, I don't know that we would do any better now, but we certainly would have. I think we all collectively, watching enough football, watching enough sports, we would all have at least the basic knowledge of, you know what? Maybe we shouldn't grab people by their heads and by their necks and twist them around. Maybe that's not a good idea.
Yeah, and it was just so unfortunate because it's just like the idea that this bird was going so fast that it breaks this dude's neck. It's just like the amount of velocity that would it take, or it does take, and it's probably happened. I'm sure it's happened back in those days because the windows are not necessarily up to par as like windows today on aircrafts, right? But man, that's such an unfortunate way to go, man. Like I couldn't help but think of like Randy Johnson hitting that bird with the baseball, and in this case, it's kind of the reverse, and it's like the birds getting revenge on humans, and then of course you get the birds later on. But this is not even like a death in the birds. This
I
is
mean,
like
if there's one thing I can guarantee you, it's that Mother Nature will always work to get its revenge on human beings. And
And you
I mean,
say that
look,
because earlier in the movie they set that bomb or that nitrous or whatever it was, or
yes.
nitroglycerin or whatever. They dropped it on a bunch of condors, man. And I was like, what the fuck was up with that? And then of course they got their revenge later. So
I mean, this is why. I mean, it's capitalism. That's what it is. I mean, that's what this movie is. The subtext is all about how bad capitalism is and how much it literally murders people in this movie. And I mean, it doesn't get addressed nearly as much as it should because this is. I mean, this is a tragic story. The story of the pilot who dies in the beginning, a kid. Like this is a tragedy. The fact that they can die doing these things, this job, that this is the only way that they can make money and afford things and live their lives. I mean, this is the way that they see themselves. I mean, this is definitely something that is real. I mean, this is something that people who work in the mines and end up with end up with bad lungs. I mean, this is what happens. People literally putting their lives on the line. Now, how many people have gotten cancer because of the places they worked in? I mean, we're going to be talking about a movie in 2 weeks where the actors literally had asbestos sprinkled onto them for a scene for the movie. So, I mean, this is the world that we unfortunately continue to live in.
Yeah, that's unfortunate, but I think that's the best way to put this movie. I think you got it right in the head, like nailed it on the head. It's just like it's a good watch, but there's this dark undertone that is just it's obviously there, and they just
Needs to
don't
be addressed
touch.
more, I would say.
Yeah, it's unfortunate, but that's greed. That's kind of like the heart of it all. And you're right, it's capitalism. So on a foreign soil, so that's even more poignant. I don't know, but man, just I do think this is a good watch. Like I said before, I'm a big Cary Grant fan in general because I think he's so good at like being sarcastic and snarky and insulting people, but so like gentlemanly about it. It's like I can't tell sometimes if he's insulting someone or is he complimenting someone.
And
And that,
that's the whole idea. That's his gimmick.
yeah, and I love this gimmick, and he does it here, and he doesn't quite do it as much as like other movies, but
He
he's kind of
doesn't do
reserved
it
here.
nearly as well, I would say. I think
Yeah, it's the stoicism
I
that
don't
kind of
think
holds
it's
him back.
played. Yeah, it's weird. I feel like again, I feel like this was a miscast in my opinion, and again, this movie has gotten a lot of very high regards, but for me, this is just not a movie that works out nearly as well as maybe it should, or maybe it does in 1939. I think that this is a movie that is really unfortunately having issues attached to it because of the plot kind of being all over the place, and I think movies felt a certain obligation to be everything to everyone back in this era because I mean when you're going to a movie at this time, it's not like you're taking people away from the TV or from in many cases the radio. Like this is what their entertainment is going to the movies, and I think that you kind of miss out on some of those. Like, is this about a plot? Not really. It's more so about I think getting to see these actors perform with each other. It's much more about the kind of the I guess the specific elements of the movie, not that aren't the plot. I think is much more of what people in this era were concerned with. It's much more about going to see Cary Grant and Jean Arthur than to see a movie where like they're really invested in the plot elements. And I think that is a huge difference from what we would experience today because today it's like we've almost gone the complete other way in that the plot is more important than the characters, and I think that's that's actually the problem that we have now.
Yeah, I gotta agree with that because this clearly has a focus on like the general audience and star power and stuff like that. But again, a guy like Thomas Mitchell comes in as a side character, kind of elevates these smaller roles, so it does make it a little more respectable in that light. But again, I think this is a 7 out of 10. Uh, Plot issues
That's what
aside,
actually we are on the same wavelength on this
yeah,
movie in a big.
yeah. And especially like since me being a King Kong fan, like I can kind of tell like how these effects were kind of done. And as soon as I see that plane landing, I was like, oh, they're doing the miniature style because I've seen that so many times in Godzilla and King Kong, but they did it in a style where it blends in well. And I think when you blend in well, the miniatures with like whatever matte paintings you have in like the 60s and 70s, if you want to do that and mix it in with like the live set, I think you can do it right. It can look good. In this case, Hard Knocks did it well.
For sure. So that is Only Angels Have Wings, another very notable 1939 movie. We are going to be going through another one. Brian was very surprised to hear that I had never seen a John Ford or a John Wayne movie. And next week, I'm popping the seal, so to speak, because we will be discussing 1939's Stagecoach. There is going to be so much to talk about with that movie. A lot of racism, more than this week. But any other thoughts before we head out, Brian?
Yeah, I guess the title's more of a metaphor than anything, because when you hear this title at first, you're thinking it's like almost like a religious kind of comedy or something like that. But no, it's more of a metaphor about only angels have wings. Kind of means that only certain pilots have certain kind of worthiness to being a pilot. Otherwise, you're going to fail. So that's kind of the
Apparently, you need
metaphor
to
of the
be a
title.
Christian in order to find success as a pilot. I guess that's the message of the movie.
Yeah, and don't die and get paid.
Yeah. What's with our angel theme we got going on? Angels in the outfield. Only angels have wings. We got that going on for us too.
Just timing, just kind of like how I timed the Dodgers winning the World Series to coincide with the last date of the eighth and ninth innings podcast. So I don't know. Just timing is everything with Fernando
You
Valenzuela. And, oh
set up
yeah,
very well. Yep.
yeah. Let's knock on some wood, folks, and hope that the rest of the year is kind of clean on celebrity deaths. They don't break our hearts.
For sure. So for Brian, my name is Jerome. Thank you so much for listening. We will talk to you again next week.